In my opinion, there are three things that make a game great. There are the mechanics, there are the aesthetics, and there is the narrative. A game lives and dies not only on the strength of each part, but also how well each of these parts come together to reinforce the others. The mechanics of a game is what make the game that we play. It's like the skeleton, the structure. Mechanics are what make the game interactive, and without them, well, it wouldn't even be a game. It would be akin to a movie, a song, or a book. Mechanics do not only apply to video games, but also apply to games in real life. In football, you can't use your hands. In Monopoly, you roll dice each turn. Good mechanics are fluid, they're easy to pick up on, but have plenty of depth to them. Bad mechanics, on the other hand, are either too complex for their own good or don't even work right. A game's aesthetics include the music, the art, and the sound direction. Where mechanics are the skeleton of the game, aesthetics are basically everything else. The aesthetics are what turn a game into an experience. A game's aesthetics work to give the mechanics some impact. Good aesthetics give the swings of your sword some weight to them. They make the gun that you fire a blast to use, and they give those cutscenes some emotion so they really hit home. Bad aesthetics can cause a lot of dissonance with the player. For example, we could be getting shot at but have no idea because the game couldn't convey that information to us. Or even worse, it could turn an otherwise serious scene into a big mess. The narrative is the story that the game tries to tell us. In a lot of modern games, we often see narrative get pushed aside in favor of aesthetics and mechanics. But a game with a strong narrative focus is able to make us feel all sorts of emotions. It does a great job of pulling us into the experience. While a game with a very bad narrative only serves to pull us out of the experience and remind us that we're playing a game. It can turn an otherwise great moment into just an embarrassing mess. Even in games that have extremely little narrative focus, like Super Mario Bros., Doom, or Flappy Birds, we the players will add our own stories to them. A game is never completely devoid of story because it is we the players who give the games that we play stories and context. We all remember that one level or that one boss that we just couldn't beat. It was only after trying over and over again, or maybe it was just a freak chance of luck that we managed to make it past them. In a way, we add our own narrative to the experience. Narrative is unique among these three because it is something that the player builds internally using what the designers have put in the game. Personally, my favorite use of narrative is when designers leave clues and scatter information across the game, and they leave it up to the players to take those pieces and to construct their own narrative. These three factors must work together to reinforce what makes each one so great. The aesthetics should reinforce the mechanics to make each action satisfying, and it should also work in tandem with the narrative to make sure that the tone remains consistent. And the narrative works with the game's mechanics to give them some context. A great example of how these three factors come together and make a game great is in Dark Souls. In Dark Souls, you are a cursed undead that revives every time you die. Eventually, you will go mad, for that is your fate. At the beginning of the game, you are given purpose by being told to ring the two bells of awakening in order to find out what your true fate is. As you travel through the world, you find items that tell stories of other adventurers that have come before you. You learn about other lands. You learn about the monsters that you're fighting. And it also works to humanize a lot of characters that otherwise simply would have been forgotten. The Four Lords would have been really weird bosses were it not for their descriptions giving them so much context. The game's aesthetics work to reinforce the tone the narrative has set in place. In Dark Souls, you'll see many ruined buildings. You'll see hollows act like mad beasts, and who only know to fight whatever gets close. The monsters that you fight in different areas tell you a lot about what has happened there. In Izalith, you face horrifying demons. In the Grand Archives, monsters you see are either crystals or are covered in crystals. And in the Catacombs, everything is a skeleton. This works together with the narrative to really give you a sense of bleakness, of sadness, of how bad things have become now that the fire is fading, and the unfortunate consequences of trying to rekindle it. Dark Souls mechanics can be summed up with two concepts: balancing risk and reward, and commitment. Dark Souls does a very good job of making pressing R1 very, very difficult. Because when you press a button to attack, it is a huge commitment, especially with the game's stumble mechanic, which gives you additional end lag if you whiff your attack. Every attack has this huge pullback on it before you swing it, and by working together with the aesthetics, this does a great job of giving the weapons you swing some real weight to them, making each weapon class feel unique, giving those who use the giant's Y-hander a completely different experience from those who would use daggers. The mechanics of dying and being revived also works with the narrative. As stated earlier, you are an undead that will revive over and over again, slowly going more mad each time you die. You see other NPCs die, and when they do, many of them go mad. The pain from dying over and over weighs heavy on these characters. And you, as the player, also experience this. Each time you die, you also consider giving up on hope. You get frustrated and lash out within the game. The emotions that the mechanics make you feel are amplified by the aesthetics of the game, and this is echoed within the narrative. The game doesn't make you feel bad by talking about how bad things are. It makes you feel it by making you go through it yourself. Honestly, the idea of going hollow is ingenious, because it allows the developers to weave together the game's mechanics, aesthetics, and narrative in a way that so few games can. There are many other games that do an incredible job of meshing together narrative, aesthetics, and mechanics, Undertale being a great example. But a game doesn't necessarily need to focus on all three in order to be great. Visual novels like Katawa Shoujo have such an engaging narrative and such well-directed aesthetics that it doesn't need fancy mechanics to hold itself up. Getting a few choices every now and again is enough to make the player feel like they are a part of the story. A game like Doom 2016 has very little in the way of narrative. In fact, it seems like the game doesn't even want you to hear the story behind it. But the game's mechanics and aesthetics work so well together to make such an incredible pulse-pounding experience that it can stand on its own without the context of a narrative. There are even old D&D games, or even older text-only adventures that are devoid of aesthetics beyond an occasional image, and these show that a game can stand on its narrative and mechanics alone. Hell, even a game like checkers and chess prove that a game can survive on mechanics alone. Thank you for your time. For the next video, I'll be talking about the fourth element of what makes a game great: counterplay. Goodbye.